So before I have Cindy read today's scripture passage, which is Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 30, I want to say yes, you're not crazy. You heard this last week. The way the scriptures were set up, they split the story in half. And at the end of the story, Jesus is run out of town on a rail, and they try to throw him off a cliff, which I thought kind of influenced how I understood the beginning of the story, so I felt like I kind of had to read the two parts together. So, but I was really stumped, because what Jesus said during his inaugural sermon as he preached in his hometown of Nazareth just wasn't that, I couldn't see how it would provoke that fury. So for those of you who weren't here last week, I just asked the question from all of your life experience, what do you see in the text? And then I went back to the text and back to some of my sources. And so this week it will be a more traditional sermon. You don't have to answer questions. There will be no cold calling in this week's service. But I appreciate it because it allowed me to have a much deeper insight into this text. So Cindy, would you remind us of what the text is?
Certainly. It's a scripture reading, Luke 4, 14 through 30, and it's on page 835 to 36, 836 in your Bible. Then Jesus, filled with the power of Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of the sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum.'" And he said, "Truly, I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel at the time, in the time of the prophet Elijah, and none of them were cleansed except Naaman, the Syrian. When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up and drove him out of town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way.